do you guys want to just introduce yourselves? Sebastian, you want to start?
Yes, of course. I'd love to. So, hey, everybody. My name is Sebastian Ries. I'm working as a senior communications consultant for Openness and as a content specialist. And we at Openness, we basically are a boutique agency based in Berlin and working on communications and events with lots of like disruptive tech companies from B2C clients like Vinted and Gorillas up to venture capitalists like Atomico and B2B companies like Pleo or Pipedrive.
Cool.
Well, hello. So I'm Christian from Ströer. Some of you met me already. We are the opposite of boutique, I would say. So we are the big factory, trying to reach many people as quick as possible via different channels, out of home, online advertising, contact centers, direct marketing. So whatever you can imagine is where we try to provide services.
Fantastic. Let's start with something simple but complex. The do's and don'ts. Oh, hello!
In a very Israeli fashionably late.
You're not
Like
late.
yesterday.
Just in time.
You're always late.
I'll postpone my question and give More the chance to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Mor Eni, originally Israeli. Used to work for Hubram, which is the seed investment vehicle of Deutsche Telekom here in Israel. Before that, for Ecomotion, a smart mobility ecosystem. Now with APX, joint venture of Axel Springer and Porsche, investing in early stage startups all over Europe. Also in Israel, we did few investments. And Axel Springer, for those of you who don't know, the largest media company in Europe. For the Israelis, we are the owners of Yad Shtaim and Drushim, and for the non-Israelis, Business Insider, Morning Brew, and some other companies. And Porsche, you all know.
And you live in Berlin, right?
And I live in Berlin, Kreuzberg.
No, that's not cool. Let's start with the do's and don'ts in the DACH region for media. We have somebody who's very good with journalists, with PR. We have somebody who's very good with media in general, the do's and don'ts, and we have somebody who's very, very good on the B2C side and on the scaling side of it all. Do you guys want to just give your tips and tricks for the do's and don'ts of how to do media advertising and PR in Germany and Switzerland and Austria?
Sure. So, I mean, if I may start, just
No.
Very simple. You want anybody? So it's about creation. So we see so many brands, big and small, that don't care about the creative. So they just have an ad agency and they create an ad and they believe it works everywhere. And Germany and Israel and all different countries. But it's not the case, right? So quite often we see bad creation, and when you have a bad creation, your campaign has zero effect. So whatever you do, so when you spend, 10 million money you get from your seed investor in media and your creation is crap, you get out zero. Because it's a kind of multiplier. And it sounds so simple, and the rules are so simple to make a good creation. And all creative guys know how, but if you don't push them to do it, you don't get what you need. So my most important word is squeeze your agency, squeeze your creative partner in whatever you do, B2B, B2C, online, digital, whatever you do, get very good, superior creations.
Just don't use humor, right? Because German speakers don't have humor.
You may use, but you may not use the Israeli humor.
Can you give an example? No, just kidding.
Difficult, political.
More.
Yeah, maybe if I can talk about it from knowing the Israeli perspective and also living in Berlin, Germany for the past few years. So I think it's really depend if you're a B2B or a B2C companies. Obviously, and also Berlin, we need to remember it's not Germany, and every country and every kind of like city, it's a bit of a different industry. And also Berlin, for example, is a very B2C focused or very oriented ecosystem. Many of the unicorns that we see, I think most of them are B2C, meaning that they're raising a lot of money for branding and marketing because they need it. Berlin also, or Germany in general, we need to remember it's still, not yet very much digitalized. I was surprised a year ago, I saw a billboard of LinkedIn, on the street. And it's something that in Israel will never happen. And knowing Israeli startups and companies, I also know that in Israel, we all care about R&D and we're all from A200s and we will come to investors and for media company and they will cover us and will cover the story. It doesn't work like that. I mean, I think that if you want to build a strong brand in Germany, it's something that takes a lot of time. You really need to understand how to localize yourself. I would highly recommend to use PR agencies that really know what they are doing. It's not like in Israel that you know the reporter of the marker here and there, and then you come and then you ask, hey, please cover my story. And also what we see here in the Israeli news, it's like every company that raised 300K, they are like the next unicorns and their faces are all over the news. In Germany, it doesn't work like that. I think also people tend to speak less about money. Even business angels, they usually don't share how much they invested. You can actually see it in VCs. So everything related to brand, especially now if we're talking about B2C, requires money, requires to understand the kind of like market itself. There are very big companies that, for example, they are operating only in Berlin because their brand is not that strong in Munich or Cologne, and they really need to have different strategy for every city. If we're talking about B2B, we still need to remember Germany still speaks German, and most companies, especially SMEs or Mittelstand, and this name was mentioned here a couple of times, they still want to have customer service. They still want to know who are you and with whom they understand. So it's really also about localizing your services, really make sure that it's not, hey, we will have this meeting with a company or we will send a flyer and they will want to meet us. It's really about building relationship and building your credibility. And that's also something you need to take into consideration. We're actually approaching to those markets. And also that it's not like, hey, someone will just cover what we're doing, but to have actually working with someone professional about that. And also for local companies, it's not that easy. So really take it in consideration. It's very different than the Israeli ecosystem and how media works here.
Really,
yeah. And I think from an even more granular like PR perspective that I have, it is what I see with many international companies coming to Germany and getting in touch with German journalists for the first time. It oftentimes ends in frustration because they come here oftentimes with like the US American or Anglo-American perspective of we want to collaborate with the journalists and the journalists are interested in writing a hero's journey or something about my product. And oftentimes that's just not the case. So journalists in Germany still take huge pride in their like perceived objectivity, neutrality. They're not there to be your friends, basically. They're not here to discuss like story bits and pieces with you, like, hey, that could be interesting, or this could be an interesting topic to talk about. They will ask you critical questions. They're not here to make you look good. They're not a service provider in that regard. So they will be critical towards you. They will want to have every claim that you make backed up by data, for example. So if you cannot back something up, that will just intrigue them to ask if that what you claim is actually true. They don't want to authorize quotes, and even if they do share quotes with you to authorize before, and for example, after an interview, they really hate it if you mess up with the stuff that they've already written. And they hate nothing more than to be applauded, for example, on LinkedIn by a CEO after an news piece comes out. The typical, hey, it was such a pleasure to work with you, such a great piece. That's something that interferes with their point of being objective and neutral. And I know that sounds kind of a bit dangerous and risky and stuff, but I know the reward, like if you navigate through all these points working with German media, you benefit from like a huge reputation boost. It's just that you need to know that this is less like setting up an editorial, but it is like journalists in Germany still work hard on the journalistic side of things, especially when you're talking to higher tier or general interest outlets.
I totally agree. And if I can just add, Axel Springer, as I mentioned, is the largest media company in Europe. Having said that, it's not that they cover stories about the startups we invested in. I mean, we need to understand it's like huge operations. It's not that it's like an easy access for that. And you really need to build relationships, even if we are the shareholders of the company.
And how do you build those relationships? How do you get in contact with the necessary journalists, the necessary, also on the media side, for example? How do you get there? What's the step that we need to take to get this ball rolling?
Well, if I may start, so I think what is most important is that trust in Germany is built, at least when you initially approach journalists, with having like a really tailored approach that really is 100% fit to the needs by the journalist. That kind of gives you the trust by the journalists that you really only provide stuff and stories to them that they benefit from, in terms of they get a good story out of it. And this is like the stepping stone in building some kind of relationship. If you go in there for the first time, never talk to the journalist before, and give them just a generic pitch about your company, about your product, that will just irritate them in some kind of sort, because yes, they might cover startups for the newspaper, but only because they cover startups. That's not necessarily mean that they're interested like in any startup or any product that you want to share with them. So I think like the first impression, so to say, like really taking the time and working out like a storyline that is a pure fit for only this one journalist is the one point to start it. And then from that point onwards, you can build upon that, because then he gives you the benefit of the doubt in certain scenarios. But without this first impression, you're going to land on a blacklist quite quickly.
But let's make one positive point. Otherwise, all startups are going away, right? I mean, I think it's relatively easy to get broadcast space in Germany, because there is a lot of broadcast space on TV, on out of home, on newspapers, on wherever. And if you go B2C, and if you have a good creative, remember, and if you build a good relationship, strong product, blah, 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 then it's rather easy to get loads of cheap to nil broadcast space in media for equity deals for your product. That's a good news.
Can you dive? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say I agree with media for equity. I think it's very important, but also first do your homework to understand which kind of media outlets might be relevant to what you're doing. Try to understand with which kind of like journalist or newspaper you want to talk to. There are so many, and it's really important to understand. Second, I think all those lists, all the top 100 companies in sustainability or something like that, try to be in those lists. The European Union also have all those lists, so really try to bring your brand, and also localize what you're doing. Meaning, don't come to a reporter if you're a fintech company, say we have collaboration with a local bank in Israel, with Bank Leumi. Go there after you already have some kind of like partners or clients that are German brands or Austrian or Swiss, and really try to localize your activity, so it will also give you the kind of like brand recognition that you need.
Cool. In the prep for this, we talked about three German cities that nobody here has probably heard about. Oldenburg,
Osnabrück and Wuppertal.
Thank you. I have not heard about them either. What is the significance of these cities for you guys, coming from a country that has everything centralized?
Yeah, it's a German average, right? So whenever we meet the guys from Google and they want to run a POC, they go like Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and we say Berlin is a bubble. It's a complete different world than the rest of Germany. Munich is another bubble, and Hamburg maybe the smallest bubble itself, but also some kind of bubblish, right? So the average German lives in a city nobody who has not been at the US Army has ever heard of outside Germany. Like Osnabrück or Oldenburg, boring cities with 100, 200,000 people and average infrastructure. This is where Germany happens. So and they don't look to Berlin like to a shining star where everybody wants to be. Germans don't really, frankly, outside Berlin, don't really care so much about Berlin.
Careful.
So this is why consider those cities you've never heard of. Maybe you just go there and spend a day with a Handelskammer, and then you get a good impression of how the mindset is different.
There are dozens of cities in Germany, more than 200,000 people.
Yes,
Dozens.
I think 28 with more than 200K, something like that, and roughly 100 with more than 100K. Strange.
Do you wanted to say something?
I agree and I disagree. I
Like
think,
Olaf.
yeah,
You're in Berlin.
that's what I learned in Germany. You know how to agree in a polite way. I agree and disagree. I think that for Israeli companies that going to places and you really want to invest time and really have significant clients and really build your presence in Germany, you need to have a local team that speaks German, that go to those places because they know people in those places and they can build relationship. It's not like in the US where it's kind of like Zbeng vegamarnu. Sorry, it's like you need to really build long-lasting relationships also with journalists. It's not like they are not working for you. And I think we as Israelis sometimes tend to think, hey, this is what we are doing. We are the great company in the world. They should come and talk to us. It's really about building and maintaining relationship, and also the language here, not only the German, but the culture and the business that you do. You need to really understand how to do it. When you go to those small cities where I think you can have great clients with that you can build very, very long lasting relationship with, but to understand how to do it in a proper way. And I guess that's why there are professional people that know how to do it, and also companies that can support with that.
I fully agree with your disagreement.
That is a German argument. Do you guys have any questions?
Me again. I must admit that I'm surprised from this panel because as a B2C startup in Israel, where it's a disadvantage because the market is very small here, I thought that Berlin or Germany will be like a gate for Europe. And I understand from this panel that it's very local to Germany, and even in different places in Germany. So from a B2C startup that want to be international, what are the benefits to go to Germany?
The only benefit is that it's a big market, and if you make it in Germany, you make it everywhere, right? So, I mean, in most cases, probably it's a very difficult market, but I would clearly say that Germany, frankly, is not the gateway to Europe in terms of mindset of consumers, in terms of logistics, probably, in terms of industrial structures, probably, yes, in terms of political structures, yes, but mindset of consumers, I mean, many products are at a completely different level in Germany without evaluation, just different than they are in all other countries in Europe. So the way Germans handle food is a different way. The way Germans handle cosmetics is completely different than in France, right? But France is pretty similar to Spain. So really, in my opinion, Germany is very much a bubble in Europe, even in the world.
First of all, you're very smart that that's kind of like the insight that you got because it's precise. I think that if you even first of all, what is Europe? Europe is not the US. It's a lot of different languages and cultures. The Germans are not like the French and not like the Dutch and not like the Polish. It is a big market, but also from a B2C perspective, we need to understand there are places in Germany, cafes and restaurants that you still cannot pay with card. You only pay with cash. H&M and other companies, if I order from Zara, I can ask them to send me Rechnung, the invoice, before I even pay them. Everything about money and especially in the consumer side is very different than what we are used to. And I think as a B2C company, you really need to understand, indeed, Berlin is very international, but it doesn't mean that you will make it in Munich or in Cologne or in Austria. Swiss, probably not. In Switzerland, I think is the most difficult place. That's why you need to have a strategy, and you need to understand it requires resources. I wouldn't recommend early stage startup that don't have enough resources, money, and people to say, okay, I'm coming to Berlin, and without really spending the time and the effort to understand how to do that.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel.
you.
Give him a hand.